Hey guys, my guest tonight is Jesse Fink, who's written a book about the fantastic Bon Scott of AC/DC. So grab your popcorn, snacks, and your drink, and I'll see you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. We're about a half hour early because we got a special guest on tonight, all the way from Australia. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I am the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. You can find us at californiahaunts.org, or if you're more interested in our radio show, that is californiahauntsradio.com. It's a mouthful, isn't it? It's too many California haunts. Anyway, my team is 45 strong up and down the state of California, and we're in almost every county. So if you think you have a paranormal thing going on, let us know. Shoot me a message through here, and or go to our website at californiahauntsradio.com, and we can try to help you out as best we can. And we don't charge. That's the bright side. Which reminds me, let me push my button. Okay. Tonight we have a great guest. His name is Jesse. He's an author, Jesse Fink. He's written several books, most notably on AC/DC. And for those of you who may not know who AC/DC is because you're a young'un, real popular heavy metal band back in the 80s. I remember listening to them back then. And I'm really excited to have Jesse on because he's got a book that he's written about the Youngs, and he's also written about their lead singer, Bon Scott. And he's made updates to that book. So that's what we're going to be talking about today is Bon Scott, which is really cool. It's a different topic for us because, I like to cover different topics on this show. So this just happens to be another different topic for the show. But you know what? Without further delay, let me get Jesse in. Hello.
G'day. How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Very well. I don't know why my camera is not working.
Huh. Okay. I see you as okay. He'll be back. He's trying to get on. For some reason, his camera's off. Let me see if I can control that a little bit. What does it say? Hang on a second. Give me a second, you guys. Let's see what we get. Well, we'll just go audio then. It's no biggie. We'll just go audio then. It's no biggie. Don't worry about the camera. I can still hear you, so here we go. That's fine. We can just go audio. It's not a problem.
Cool.
Because I can still hear you. Anyway, tell me about you. Because you have a fascinating... I look at the different types of books you write. I mean, talk about having, a plethora of subjects.
Yeah, look, I had an unusual, I guess, arrival to AC/DC as a topic. Essentially, I started out as a sports journalist originally, sort of back in the late 90s, really. I'd worked in book publishing as an editor, went into sports journalism, got out of sports journalism, ended up sort of writing a memoir of my divorce from my wife, actually, back in 2012, and then did a book on the Youngs of AC/DC, and that book was, very successful. It kind of went around the world and kind of made a name for me, and then I spent 4 years writing a book on Bon Scott about his final years in America and his death in London, and then out of that I ended up writing a book about a cocaine trafficker in Miami who I had been introduced to while I was working on the Bon Scott book.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, when you look at your list of books, it's AC/DC, and then you have the cocaine trafficker book, and I think that's really cool. I think it's cool to change it up a little bit for these stories.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, each book kind of leaches into the next one. So, the fact was that I kind of met someone in Miami who introduced me to the cocaine trafficker, and if I hadn't been working on the Bon Scott book, I would never have met this person. So you just never know where you're going to end up. And right now I'm writing a book about a spy in World War II. So cool. There's no kind of kind of linear path really for my career. I don't know where I'm going to end up. I don't know what I'm going to be doing next. I could be writing about, I mean, I don't even know what your podcast's about. What's it? Spectral figures. I don't know. Who knows what I could be end up writing about?
Right. So tell me about your interest with AC/DC. Then, how did you get interested in that?
More or less, it was the beginning of my. It's at the start of my book, The Youngs. I talk about I was basically having a very low moment where I basically wanted to kill myself. And I ended up kind of just happening to find Power Age on my laptop and put it on at the right time. And it kind of lifted me out of the depression and suicidal ideation I was feeling at the time, and kind of made me feel great and sort of made me feel optimistic and inspired the next day. And I got on with my life, and I felt that AC/DC's music was a great antidepressant for me during that period.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, well, there is something to be said for, rock and roll really as a antidepressant. And, AC/DC is the biggest rock band in the world. Why is that? Why do they connect with more millions of people than really any other band in the world? I mean, if you go to Facebook or whatever, AC/DC's got 35 million followers or whatever. They're about as big as it gets. And you can go to anywhere in the world. You can go to the Himalayas. You can go to South America. You can go to, Africa. You're going to see kids in AC/DC T-shirts. And why is that? So, the Youngs was really a tribute to them out of my own sort of, personal tragedy, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to kind of do a book that was really kind of, talking about how music can transform your life. And the thing is, out of that book, so many people came to me and said, look, hey, dude, I've got, a similar story, my wife left me, or, my daughter died, or whatever. And these people had found that rock music, and especially the music of AC/DC, had kind of helped them through a bad period. And I think that is something that isn't celebrated enough. I don't think we kind of talk about rock music seriously enough. And as an art form in its own right. And just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not, brilliant or complex.
Right.
And what AC/DC have done is they've honed and perfected a formula that is incredibly people feel incredibly kind of touched by it for various reasons, and it doesn't have to be necessarily just sort of getting drunk in a bar and sort of watching a stripper. It can be sitting at home like I was, listening to rock and roll at a very low moment, and that can sort of pick you up and make you feel fantastic. And so that's what the book was about. And then the Bon Scott book was a completely different book altogether. That was a biography about the last 3 years of his life, basically focusing on his time in the United States, which was the wall to wall kind of shows over a 3-year period, and then the last few months of his life in London.
Mm-hmm. I remember with I was in high school when AC/DC had started to hit its peak, and I remember because my father was very old school. Back he was born back in 1926. So
Right.
when all this heavy metal music came out, I mean, you had Kiss, you had Motley Crue, you had AC/DC all mixed in. My father was having fits over this stuff, and I remember all the stuff, even Black Sabbath, we'll say too, and all the stuff people were concerned about it being so satanic with kids listening. But I don't, I think it's a handful of kids that looked at it that way, because for me, I'm like you. I like the music. I enjoyed it. And there's stuff that AC/DC's done that's humorous. I mean, I'm not going to mention the name of the song, but there's one in particular that I think is just absolutely hysterical. So it's a way to it's like escapism. You get into it. It's like the music during the talkie movies during the 30s when people had no money.
But
go for that escape, and that was my draw. It was an escape to listen to the music because it was a time. It was something me growing up in suburbia here in California that I wouldn't even dream of doing. Does that make sense? But I could see them doing it.
But the thing was, having written the Bond book, it was also for me a way of exploring, a whole era in music that will never be repeated. So why were the 70s such a sort of a rich vein of incredibly creative musicians and bands and fantastic music, all the music you listen to on the radio these days.
Mm-hmm.
If you're anywhere, driving on a highway in America, you're going to at some point hear AC/DC on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And other bands like Eagles, Van Halen, REO Speedwagon, all these sort of great American bands, and here we are today, and what's modern music? It's Justin Bieber and shit like that. It's like so how have we gone from bands like Foreigner,
Right.
fantastic musicians and songwriters, and bands like Supertramp to Justin Bieber. I mean, it's a big come down.
Yeah, it is. I think music cycles too. I think you go through, for a while there, the big band era stuff was coming back, and then that kind of died down again, and then we went back through kind of like a metal phase, because then you had the second generation of these rockers coming out, like Poison and all these other people, and then then the 80s hit, and it was a rehash. They were doing a bunch of cover stuff. And then now, like you say, I don't know what the trend that music's going on right now. It's just so different.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of rock and roll, there's no kind of new rock bands coming out, and if they are coming out, they're basically just clones of bands that we already knew in the 70s. So look at Greta Van Fleet, basically a clone of Led Zeppelin.
Mm-hmm.
Or the money in rock and roll these days is in tribute bands.
Yeah.
And I think tribute bands are a plague. I think they're just there's just too many of them. I don't want to see another ad for a tribute band on Facebook. It's just they're just everywhere, and it's incredibly dispiriting that like I said, the 70s were sort of like a sort of an unparalleled era for, I think, creativity in rock and roll, and so many fantastic songs and songwriters came out of that period, and I wanted to kind of celebrate that in the book, and I think it's a fascinating thing in itself, quite apart from Bon Scott. The thing is, in the 70s, you needed to be really good at what you did. You needed to be a great musician. It wasn't about the producer. It wasn't about the engineer. It wasn't about the samples or whatever. You had to get up on stage and play live, and you had to be really bloody good.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, these days the choices are pretty slim, I guess, when it comes to sort of seeing live acts, live rock acts. I mean, look at John Bon Jovi. He can't even sing anymore. So.
Right.
People love listening to AC/DC. They never get bored of it.
No, and like you say, it is like all the live acts now. Everybody's retiring. Kiss is on their. Well, they say they're on their last tour right now, but But I mean, but
they're Kiss. They're Kiss. They're going to come out in another 3 years and have their other farewell tour.
It's a good thing they wear the makeup too, especially now, because man, they're old. I mean, all these guys are so old, but it's our generation that wants to hear it. I mean, if AC/DC came out with a new album, I'd be the first one in line.
Yeah, and a lot of people, still are, just like you. So the last album AC/DC put out, went to number 1 in 30 countries or whatever it was. And, while it wasn't sort of classic AC/DC, people still, have a great affection for the AC/DC sound. And I just think, and I argue this extensively in everything that I do, that the high point of AC/DC essentially was kind of the Bon Scott era, and it all sort of ended essentially in 1980.
Mm-hmm. See, Jennifer says it's all about dancing now. I think so too. I think it's all about dancing. And again, like I said, the cycles. Back in the 20s and 30s with the big band music, it was about the dancing. So we're cycling again with a different style of music, though. But
Yeah.
I miss that other stuff. I miss hearing AC. Well, of course, I listen to the rock stations that play it, but I miss that. I remember seeing AC/DC in concert, and it was absolutely fantastic.
I'd like to know the girl that just contacted you. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't dance to anything these days. I can't dance to anything sort of post 1981. I think it all kind of ended really with the disco era. I mean, the disco era in itself was fantastic. It is deserving of a great book, and I would love actually to do something on disco, because I just think that's another much maligned musical genre that deserves more respect.
I do too. In fact, I just think, what, that was again. But when you look at it too, again, disco was fun for people to dance to, just like listening to AC/DC and these other groups. If you take it, don't take it from the perspective that the critics were saying, the whole satanic thing going on. If you don't take it from that perspective and just listen to the music for what it is, it's fun to listen to.
Yeah, and that whole satanic thing is just a load of bullshit anyway.
Oh, yeah, it's a lot of crap.
I don't know how that sort of just got out of control like it did. It was originally, I think it was the Richard Ramirez thing, and then it just sort of took off from there, and it's just all garbage.
And I would think, like for the AC/DC and for Kiss, because I've seen Kiss several times too, that image though is fun for them to project. Even though they're not like that, it's kind of a fun thing. It's like being an actor, and you're going to go out and say, okay, I'm gonna spit fire. I'm gonna spit fire in this show. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the whole devil thing has sort of been good for AC/DC, certainly in terms of merchandising.
Yeah.
They've sold millions and millions of pairs of devil horns, at their concerts, and they make a lot of money from their merchandise.
Yeah.
But essentially, AC/DC today is a brand band. And and you mentioned Kiss. Kiss is another brand band. Yeah. They're making their money from t-shirts and coffee cups and you name it.
I just wonder, like with AC/DC, how much longer they're gonna tour and stuff, because I mean, all these other guys are hanging it up.
Yeah, and AC/DC's obviously had their own sort of tragedies to deal with in recent years, with certainly the death of Malcolm Young. And it looked like it was all over. Then they sort of got together again, and Brian Johnson sort of went back into the studio, and Cliff Williams came back, Phil Rudd came back. I mean, those guys are essentially the nucleus of AC/DC,
right?
Along with Angus Young, and then you've got Stevie Young stepping in for Malcolm. And I think post-COVID, if travel restrictions around the world sort of get back to normal, I think there's a very good chance that AC/DC will do another stadium tour.
That would be fun. That would be really fun. So let's talk about Bon Scott. He was the man. He was the voice. And I mean, I'm not taking anything away from the current lead singer at all. I think he's great. The guy's been around for years. But I mean, there was just something about Bon Scott.
Yeah, he had an incredible stage presence. He really knew how to work the stage. He was a fantastic mover, even when he wasn't singing. You just watch Bon move around. He's fantastic to watch. He had great personality, sort of a devilish grin. He was a great lyricist. So his songs are are funny and bawdy and memorable. But he also wrote songs about his life. and normal sort of human struggles. And I think that's why his songs resonate with fans much more than in sort of later AC/DC period stuff, which frankly is pretty inane. If you look at the lyrics to some of these more recent AC/DC songs, that abysmal. So there's no comparison, and that's why everything that I've ever done when it comes to AC/DC is kind of drawing a line in the sand between the Bond era and the Bryan era.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of Bon Scott also leached over into Back in Black, which of course is the biggest selling hard rock album of all time.
Mm-hmm. To become a rock star, we'll look at it from his perspective. What kind of background did he have to, leading up to doing this?
Well, Bon was a bit of a chameleon. He had sort of been in, a bubblegum band called the Valentines. Before that, he was in a band called the Spectres, and then he was in a sort of a hippie band called Fraternity. And his career was essentially kind of on the skids and over when he was sort of asked to replace the first singer of AC/DC, Dave Evans. And Bon sort of transformed from a hippie into a hard drinking, hard rocking rock god, and he performed that role with aplomb. And the thing with Bon though was that a lot of it was performance. The real Bon Scott was very different off the stage.
That's why I wanted to ask you, what was he like off the stage? Because I mean, when you saw the performances were wild. So, what kind of person was he off the stage?
Well, Bon had his struggles with alcohol and drugs, but he was also, he was a bit of a person who liked to read. He liked to sort of listen to sort of different kind of music that you wouldn't expect, like Steely Dan.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty much a lone wolf, I guess, when it came to socializing with his bandmates after gigs. He would go off and do his own thing. And, he was kind of a separate entity to the band when they weren't performing. He had his own life, he had his own social circle, and he liked to party though, and had the the capacity to imbibe vast amounts of alcohol, wake up in the morning, be very neat and tidy, and sort of get on the tour bus and do it all again. But I think it's pretty clear, to anyone who is familiar with, I guess, photographs of Bond from the late 70s. He was sort of at his physical peak around 1978. You look at shots of Bond from that year, he was in fantastic shape and looked amazing. By the end of 79, he looked really bad. He had deteriorated a lot, and I think his drug use and alcohol use was off the scale, and he was certainly winding down, and that's kind of what the title of the book is all about. The Last Highway is sort of the road that Bond took to his own death through his own decisions, and he didn't have any restraint sort of when it came to sort of alcohol and drugs.
Well, let's talk about that too. I mean, when they're on tour. I mean, obviously, because I've heard stories. I interned for a while at a local radio station here, that Hannibal Rock, and you hear stories and the DJs that had been backstage and whatnot. You hear this stuff, the parties at the hotels. I mean, was it really like the press makes or like the stories go, where there's just tables lined with drugs and stuff like that?
Look, I heard a lot of stories. Certainly that there was one story that wasn't even in the book, which was Bond having sex with 10 women sort of lined up,
Wow.
in a row.
You hear that, yeah.
And Bond certainly got into the the cocaine and quaaludes and things like that when he was in Miami in '79. And I think he was pretty sort of mixed up in the heroin scene in London in early 1980, and obviously I make a case in the book that Bond died of a heroin overdose rather than the official acute alcohol poisoning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, that lifestyle, and it's like when you look at someone like Elvis, even that lifestyle leads into that because of the fact that their whole lifestyle, it's not a normal lifestyle. And so they have to do something to keep the energy levels going and keep everything going. So that I think that's what leads them to taking stuff.
Yes, well, he had no base essentially. I mean, he was on the road the entire time. So the the arc of the book is from Texas '77, AC/DC's first show in America, through to I think it was October '79, where they end up playing their last gig in Ohio and last American gig in Ohio with Bond, and then over to London where they're getting ready to record Back in Black, and there's the whole issue of how much involvement Bond had in the writing for that album, which is a perennial kind of talking point for fans, and various narratives have kind of been produced over the years, and there's the official narrative, and then there's the alternative narrative, and I think that I don't think the official narrative is true, to be honest.
Interesting. When they did make that first album, how long did it take them to make that first album?
Sorry, which album are you talking about?
The first, Back in Black.
Oh, they recorded that in the Bahamas. What was that? April 1980. So I think it might have been 6 weeks or 4 weeks or something like that. I don't know off the top of my head, but the issue is, how much of Bond's songs or how much of his lyrics ended up on that album, because he had a notebook. The notebook disappeared. Lyrically, there are songs on that album that are very kind of redolent of the Bond style. There are some very snappy phrases, some nice writing on there, and then after Back in Black, basically it all evaporates. There are no sort of great albums that can really compare to Back in Black after 1980. I think Bond had something to do with Back in Black. The information that is available suggests that he had something to do with it. The official line is that he had nothing to do with it. So there's a bit of a schism between those two camps.
Who was the producer for that album? Because I know Mutt Lange did.
It was Mutt Lange. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the guy's a master, that's for sure.
It's a great album. Taking nothing away from it. I mean, Highway to Hell, Back in Black, For Those About to Rock are 3 fantastic albums, and I think kind of AC/DC kind of lost their way after they parted ways with.
I think it's hard. Lost your way is a good way to put it, but I think it's hard once you peak like that. Trying to figure out how to keep that ball rolling, to keep people's attention, that's what's hard. Because you're looking at trends and stuff, and maybe you might want to. I mean, look at the whole glam rock thing that came through. And thank God AC/DC never fell to that. Okay, because some of those groups, where I'll tell you, with that.
Well, I mean, mid '80s AC/DC is pretty dire. I mean, the Fly on the Wall album is a shocker, and it's best forgotten. But look, the thing is with AC/DC, there are really 2 camps. I mean, or 3 camps really. There's the Bond camp, there's the Brian camp, and then there's the I love both eras camp. I'm firmly in the Bond camp, So I run a Facebook group called Bon Scott Forum on Facebook, and we have 15,000 people there. Basically, their focus is that era, and they're happy with that era. They're not really kind of fussed about anything sort of post 1980, and which is good. And it's kind of like the discussion about Van Halen. I mean, if you had asked me in 1986, who I loved in Van Halen, I would have said David Lee Roth. But like today, I'm a Sammy Hagar guy.
Right. Right.
Taste change.
And I kind of remember when, David Lee Roth left the group too. And I remember thinking, I thought, Sammy Hagar would be a really good fit. And this is way before they had decided on Sammy Hagar. So I don't know. Sometimes it, sometimes it works really well. Sometimes it doesn't. I have nothing against Brian. It's just not the same. His voice isn't as strong.
No, and David Lee Roth is exactly the same right now. He can't sing anymore. And I have the same feeling about Brian Johnson as obviously I do about John Bon Jovi. But Sammy Hagar can still sing, and if I'm just listening to Van Halen for pleasure these days, I'm certainly getting into the Hagar era.
Well, in a lot of ways, listening, and I hate to say this, but I've always had pneumonia, bronchitis, and all this stuff, and listening to Brian makes my throat hurt sometimes. It really does. I can say
that. Look, he. Look, I'm not going to get into a Brian Johnson bashing.
I'm just saying, you were talking about the difference between the two singers. Yeah, listening to Brian, with his throat, just.
Yeah, he's just struggling. You can hear it, and it's not very pleasant to listen to. Yeah.
Well, I just think that you could go through life on this kind of music and scream so much before your voice does start to go. And I just think that's a given. I mean, even Elvis, when you listen to his stuff from the 50s, as he got further and further away in the 60s, he got away from that because it was probably a strain on his voice.
Yeah. But like I said, Sammy can still sing, and right. It's just a shame, obviously, that Van Halen passed away, because it would have been great for that band to get back together.
Oh yeah. So tell me about Bon. Tell me about what was his personality like? Because you see the persona on stage and you hear little snippets off stage, but what kind of guy was he off stage?
Oh, look, I haven't heard anyone sort of say a bad word about Bon, other than that he had a sort of a dark side when he got really drunk. Mm-hmm. He was a bit of a dark drunk, and he was unmanageable, and he would do, out of control things, like urinate in the middle of someone's living room, which is, is not on for a man of 32, 33 years old to be doing that. It's just not acceptable, right? Mm-hmm. So there was that side of him, which obviously distressed some people. Certainly distressed his girlfriend Silver Smith, and led basically to the two of them breaking up. She left him because of this sort of stupid behaviour. But then again, he was also incredibly popular guy with a great sense of humour, who had a larger than life sort of personality, and sort of touched and charmed people that he came into contact with. Certainly, anyone who's had. Certainly, I've spoken to a lot of people over the years who had casual encounters or passing encounters with Bon, and they all speak of him as if he was like some sort of magical Peter Pan figure. Mm-hmm. And there is that element in parts of the AC/DC fan community that like to hold up Bon as this sort of cartoon figure. He's celebrated as if he's this rock star that's never died, that his spirit lives on, that he's the essence of rock and roll, and he represents really a way of living to a lot of people. He represents to them, I think, the way that a lot of people want to live or like to think that the way they want to live and aren't living. He's an aspirational figure, so they end up sort of getting tattoos of him on their arms or legs or backs or whatever. It's like it's a bit of a cult, really. But that's not really the real Bon Scott. It's the cartoon Bon Scott. It's the Bon Scott that you see at Bonfest in Scotland, or in these crappy documentaries that are up on television.
Right.
It's not the real guy, and certainly my book was an attempt to kind of really peel away the mythology around the bloke and see who he really was.
Now, my other question is, let's to clear something up for people, because you always wonder how they grew up. I mean, did he come from a normal childhood, a normal house, mom and dad and all that?
A Scottish family who came to Australia, when he was very young. He had, a couple of brothers. He was a bit of a larrikin, he had a bit of a wild streak. But he was never particularly, certainly later in life, according to his late girlfriend Silver Smith, he wasn't particularly close to his brothers, and spent a lot of his, like I said, spent a lot of his later life, the key sort of 3 years of his life, in my opinion, in the United States touring. And so that was why the focus for me was his time in the United States, because that was where he was spending most of his time. And you've got to remember, he kind of turned up in the United States, and in 1977, those guys worked their asses off to, gain some traction on American radio and to sell records, and they were in danger of kind of being dumped by the record company at various points. And then they had their breakthrough with Highway to Hell, and before then they released Power Age, which today I think is their best record, and I think it's recognized by people as the best record, but it wasn't a commercial success. The tragedy is, he passed away, right on the cusp of them, becoming a massive worldwide band.
Right.
But, the question is, if Bon hadn't died, would Back in Black have been as big as it was?
Right.
And I think in a lot of ways, his death and the circumstances around his death and the mystery of his death kind of infused that album and sort of made it bigger than it was.
Now, what was their schedule like, during that time period? I mean, it's like you say, that they worked their butts off trying to get this thing to launch. So what was a typical day for them like?
Well, I mean, if you look at actually in the book itself, there's an appendix of all their American shows, and it's just dozens and dozens of pages of. It's essentially those guys were playing a show every day, sometimes twice a day. Right across the United States. There were only a few states in America they didn't play. I think it was like seven or eight states they didn't actually play. So they were going everywhere. I don't think you would find a harder working band in the rock business in the late 70s than AC/DC. And the great thing about them was that they were turning up and they were blowing other bands off the stage. Bigger bands. People were going to concerts sort of expecting that the headline act, was going to be the best band they saw that day. And in fact, AC/DC kind of, as the support act for a lot of these bigger acts, eclipsed them.
Of course they did. Excuse me. I just thought of something too. I mean, there's a lot of cases, and I don't think it was AC/DC so much, but because the tour schedule these bands were on, a lot of these people in the bands didn't even know what city they were in half the time, because they were hitting so many cities.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that sort of fed into probably the drinking and the drugging, and Bond losing sense of his own who he really was. Was he who was he? Was he the guy off the stage, or was he the guy on the stage? They were two sort of separate things, and I think I can only you can only speculate, because obviously
Right.
I was 6 years old when Bond died, 7 years
Right.
old when Bond died. I can't say exactly what was going on in his head, but if you spend 4 years researching someone's life, speaking to hundreds of people,
Mm-hmm.
as I have, you do sort of come up with your own sort of judgments and conclusions about what was going on sort of internally. And but the thing is, I haven't sort of written this book as like the gospel. It's like I
Right.
just want people to read it, look at the information that I've come up with, the evidence for various things, and kind of make up their own mind. Make up their own mind, because nothing's definitive.
Right, and I agree with you. It was probably really hard when they were on the road to separate that, because you got all the groupies around. You got all the groupies around. You got all the yes men around.
Mm-hmm.
And so the yes men make you feel real good because you're the god. Hey, everything you do,
Exactly.
everything you touch turns to gold. But then it's hard. I would think it would be hard after all that adulation to go back to try being a normal person.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I went and spent time with his girlfriend in Miami. I mean, she opened up a house to me. We spent a lot of time together. We're still friends. She knew him better than most, as did Silver Smith in Australia, who died in 2016. Neither of those women wanted any publicity, right? They're private people, or one of them is private and the other one is dead, but they're both private people, but they knew him best. And the ironic thing is that a lot of these people who go around sort of saying, "Oh, I knew him best," I know the full story. They're the people who are going out sort of seeking the publicity. The people who really knew him aren't going out there saying, "Hey everyone, I knew Bon Scott. Look, here's a picture of me with Bon Scott. I'm the person who knew him best. I was his soulmate," or whatever. It's like the real people who matter are the people who don't want to talk to you. They're the people whose trust you have to gain.
Right.
And I sort of did that, over a period of 4 years. And I wrote this back in I finished it in 2017. What is it now? 2022. So it's been 5 years since the original edition came out. I've been working. I started working on Bon Scott in 2014. So it's almost been 10 years. Me sort of inhabiting this world, this Bon Scott world. And I've come to learn a lot of things. Learn that there are a lot of people who hate my guts for kind of even attempting to or daring to write this book. That bucks all the sort of conventional narratives, that upsets a lot of people. But the proof is in the pudding. It's the biggest selling Bon Scott biography ever written. It's published around the world. I think fans are recognizing that some of the stories that have been told over the years aren't true, or should at least be questioned. And ultimately, I think it's about time someone actually bit the bullet and attempted a serious documentary about Bon Scott, because the documentaries that we've had up to this point, including the Australian Story, the documentary that was released the other day, are just a load of shit.
Well, I just think a lot, like you say, as far as access goes to the people that really knew him. I think that's why you see a lot of these documentaries like they are, because people, they don't want to talk to these documentary people, and so they're going to go with whatever hearsay or whatever's in the newspaper or whatever to put together the documentary. I think that's where the problem lies.
Yeah, and I certainly look, if I were producing a documentary, I'd have a very, very select list of who I'd be talking to. Mm-hmm. It's not about, hey, I met Bon Scott in 1978, and here's me in a picture with Bon Scott. Well, that's great, but that doesn't sort of make you an interesting person to talk to. I mean, the people who really mattered, to me in the telling of the Bon Scott story were the people that were so difficult to find. They're the people who are not putting themselves out there. They're not the people who have made their whole lives or built their whole identities around their passing association with Bon Scott, 45 years ago. And there are so many people like that, and it's kind of pathetic. But, whether it's AC/DC or another band, there are a whole bunch of people who are like that, who just sort of make such a big deal about their passing association with, or dalliance with, some rock star 50 years ago. I mean, it's kind of pathetic.
Or like I said, it must be tough for the rock star themselves to find friends that they can trust. I mean, right now, I hear stuff all the time about, well, I'm not going to do autographs because somebody's going to turn around and sell it on eBay.
Yeah, absolutely.
It must be, to be in that position and to try and find people that are real around you, like his girlfriends. It's hard. It's got to be hard.
Yeah, exactly. And look at, even dating today. Can you imagine what it's like if you're, a single Hollywood star or, whatever, and you're just trying to meet someone who's normal, who's not going to treat you differently because of your celebrity? It would be extremely, extremely hard. And, the level of kind of celebrity and adulation these guys in the 70s is kind of nothing compared to what it's like today,
right?
Because of social media and the internet and everything else. Got to remember, in those days, people got their information about rock stars through picking up a copy of Circus or Billboard or whatever, or listening to their local radio station. There was no internet, there was no iPhone, there was nothing like that. So the world has changed completely, and celebrities just got out of control. I
remember going down to Tower Records to meet Quiet Riot, just an autograph. I remember standing in line for hours just waiting for a quick handshaking out the door.
Yeah.
Those days. That's how old I am. I never say
old.
I never say how actually old I am, but that's how old I am. Was standing in line to see Quiet Riot.
Yeah.
So tell me, were you able to find out what happened that last night with him, and who he was with?
Yes, and I've certainly done more work in that respect than anyone has ever done. I can confidently say that. I found a woman who said that she was with Bon Scott and Alistair Kinnear when Bon was back at the flat in East Dulwich, where he was found in the car. So there was a third person there who had never sort of admitted this before. It took 40 years for her to say that, and I managed to get that out of her. Which makes you really question how thorough the original police sort of investigation was into the circumstances of Bon's death, and this this updated edition that's coming out in a couple of weeks, which you can pre-order through Amazon now. It has more information about Bon's last 24 hours and who was with him, and there was actually another person who was with the three of them, and there's more to this story than people think. It's not just a case of Bon was left in the car with a blanket and sort of was found the next day. There's a whole lot more to it, and I certainly am of the view that he succumbed to something else other than the official version.
And I would think it would be hard to gauge somebody too, because I mean, when people take, I mean, even like normal painkillers for back pain and stuff, when people take that stuff, their body gets used to it. And when they're on it, you can't tell that they're on it really, because they're not acting goofy or anything else. You know, they don't look like they're under duress. So I could see where, like, with a person like Bond, you know, he's been taking and drinking this stuff, or we'll just say the drugs part, you know, taking it, and his body could tolerate a lot of it. So I mean, people probably, you know, didn't even realize how far gone he was at that point.
Yeah, but you know, like his blood alcohol reading was about half of what killed Amy Winehouse.
Okay.
Right. And Bond was a sturdy drinker. He was a sturdy, storied drinker. He could handle his alcohol. The fact is that he was hanging out with and in the company of people who were either heroin users, associated in some way with heroin. He was mixed up in the heroin crowd in London. I spoke to anyone that I could find who was known to have played a role in, you know, his last 24 hours. Certainly the people that were still alive, and I also spoke to people who have since died. It's a case of, you know, running against the clock, because, you know, these people are passing away, and time is running out to actually get the real story about what happened to Bond that night. It's not as sort of neat and tidy as people think it is. It's actually a fairly complex, quite confusing actually, story, and that's why it ended up sort of taking me 2 years alone just to kind of, you know, work through all the various stories that had been told about what happened and kind of make sense of all that information, and kind of, you know, put it together in a way where it kind of made sense.
Now, talking about your interest in AC/DC, now, I mean, you were 6 years old when he passed away. So how did you get interested in AC/DC? Did you have older siblings that were playing the music?
No, like I said before, it was just simply a case of, you know, Power Age coming on at the right time when I needed AC/DC to come into my life. And, you know, I'd been into rock and roll. I grew up in Sydney, in and around the Balmain rock scene here. You know, my mates were all, you know, rock musicians, and, you know, I'm not saying I never didn't listen to AC/DC before that point, but I certainly got into AC/DC in a bigger way after my own sort of, you know, pivotal experience or pivotal sort of exposure to their music. And then, you know, I went and wrote the books, and, you know, to this day, yes, I would say I'm an AC/DC fan, but I also have, I think, the necessary detachment from it to kind of look at things objectively. And, you know, I started writing The Youngs as a tribute to AC/DC, but I also sort of came across a story of them being a fairly ruthless business organization as well. And so some people were fairly upset with, you know, some of the things that were written in that book about, you know, how tough AC/DC were with, you know, various sort of former band members and so on.
That was my other question too. I mean, did you get any, like the first book you wrote about the Youngs? Did you get any comments from people in the band?
Yeah. I mean, well, the current band, not at the time. I mean, I spoke to Phil Rudd later on. You know, Mark Evans, the bass player from AC/DC, he and I, we spoke with each other. He gave me a great endorsement for the book at the time, which helped a lot. And you know, so I've spoken to various people who have been in AC/DC over the years, but in terms of actually sort of penetrating the current band and getting access to them, no, that hasn't happened. I did actually have some a very short email exchange with Stevie Young at some point. But I've never spoken to Angus Young.
Okay.
Never spoken to Brian Johnson. No.
It's just so impressive to me that after, so many years, all these years, they're still as popular as ever.
Yeah, and you can look. I love them. They changed my life. I'm glad they came into my life. But like I said, I have the detachment. I have the ability to think for myself. I can see some things that I just think are a little bit, not right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, looking at the story around Bond's death and the issue of, the lyrics on Back in Black and I want to actually find out what the real story is.
Sure.
And I think that still fascinates millions of people around the world. I mean, if it didn't fascinate people, we wouldn't be talking about it, or this book wouldn't be being published. There's still a lot left, I think, to tell in the AC/DC story from those early years. And the question is, what kind of book do you want to read? Do you want to read the hagiography, or do you want to read the serious biography?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How long did it take you to write to write the updates for this book?
There's a 16-page sort of new introduction, and then I sort of went through the book and updated various parts of it, and sort of came up with adjustments to my original theories about what exactly happened to Bond. I had a lot of help from a reader in France who sort of introduced me to kind of articles in French that I had never seen, which kind of cast a different light on certain aspects of the story. That he turned up an interview with Bond in late '79 where Bond was actually saying that he wanted to leave the band, which is something that I argued in the original edition, and I certainly copped a lot of shit for saying that. But since then, from a couple of different sources, I've found that basically what I said in that original edition was true. And it's backed up by Bond himself.
So why did he want to leave?
Well, I mean, it's like, why am I writing a book about a spy? I mean, I could sort of spend the rest of my life writing books about Australian rock and roll bands, but you want to do something different. You want to sort of challenge yourself. If you're halfway creative, it's like, you want to just sort of freshen things up a bit and attempt something new and be bold, and you have one life. Why not just sort of do something different? And I don't think it's any different for a musician.
Mm-hmm.
It's like some of the most creative musicians in the world. I mean, you never know what they're going to do next, and I'm exactly the same. I don't ever want to be pigeonholed in one genre.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Bond, you got to remember, he'd been in a bubblegum band, he'd been in a hippie band, he'd been in a rock band. He'd served his time in that band. He was exhausted. He wanted to do something different. He probably would have ended up, doing ballads for MTV. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who knows? Or he could be painting now or whatever. But, I think we're all capable of reinvention, and he was certainly no different. He was one of the great reinventors.
Well, yeah, you think about like Paul Stanley. I mean, he's got a jazz band.
Yeah, exactly. And, and Sammy Hagar makes tequila. I mean, we all do sort of different things with ourselves at various points. And, I think it's great that these people, take the risk and they do something different. I think there's nothing more tedious than someone who's just sitting in their comfort zone when you know that they have the talent to do something better, or at least attempt something different.
Absolutely. Okay, one last question for you, sir. If you're trying to explain it, AC/DC, to the younger kids now to get them interested in it, how do you do that?
Look, it's just the power of rock and roll in its simplest form,
Mm-hmm.
and really, I think what I tried to do in the Youngs was I tried to sort of show that AC/DC's music is an art form in itself, and it's not to be sneered at. It's not to be dismissed just because it's so simple.
Mhm.
You know, that there is artistry in simplicity. Artistry does not have to be concomitant with, uh, complication, or it doesn't need, it doesn't need to be fussier, just to be important or to be taken seriously. You know, it's like good writing. You know, a good writer is someone who writes simply, and clearly, and gets their message across with the minimum amount of words. It's like, Ernest Hemingway.
Mhm.
Just because you use a florid phrase in your writing doesn't mean you're a good writer, and it's the same with music.
Mhm.
Break it down, make it simple. And so there's something to be learned there, I guess. By young kids. It's like, you want to know what a great musician is. Well, you go and listen to Malcolm Young's riffs from those early AC/DC records. That's art.
Mhm. Mhm. Jesse, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
No problem. It was great to talk to you, and I'm sorry about the camera, but I'm
That's
sure you
okay.
can load a photo of me later on.
There you go. I know you're a busy guy, and what's next for you?
Like I said, I'm working on a book about a spy in World War II, so that's a completely different genre for me. It's taking up a lot of time, obviously, because you're dealing with someone who's been dead a very long time, and everyone who knew him is dead, and so it's very research heavy. And but it's fascinating, and I like to do things that are totally different. And maybe one day I might write another book in music. I'm not ruling that out, but I just never wanted to kind of be seen completely as a rock writer or as a sports writer or whatever. It's like, if you write books, you write books, and you should always try to do something different.
Absolutely. How can people find you?
You can find me Instagram, Jesse Fink, or on Facebook. I'm running Bond Scott Forum. You can come to my personal page and send me a message or whatever. And guys can order the book through Amazon. You just type in, Bond updated Fink, and you should find the updated edition, which is coming out. It's got a black cover with a gold lettering, and you can't mistake it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again. I'd love to have you on a later date to talk about your projects, because you're fascinating to talk to.
Thanks so much. Okay. You
All right,
take
sir.
care.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Or a good
Bye.
day for you. It's good evening for me. Have a good one.
See you later. Bye.
All right, bye. Okay, that was some interesting stuff, and I've been looking forward to talking to Jesse for a few months. We've been trying to touch base and get the schedule straight. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Coming up, I have a psychic development class that I'm teaching, and that's going to be on. Let me flip this up. I keep doing that, huh? I keep forgetting my bloody dates. And that's going to be on the 28th at 11 a.m. And I'm going to be teaching psychic development level 1. And what that entails is a little bit of what Nancy and I were talking about last weekend. In that, when you first start out as a psychic, you open the door. But the problem is, by opening the door, not everything is nice that comes through the door. Okay? So what I teach is how to close the door. And the way I teach that, it's fun. At the same time, you're learning a lot. I teach you how to go out of body. I teach you how to come back into your body, how to open and close that door, visit your spirit animal, visit your spirit library, visit your spirit guides, meet your spirit health guides. So if you're interested in learning all that stuff and learning about protection, which is really important as well, come on and join the class. Check out California Haunts Meetup, and you can find the class there. On the 21st, I'm also teaching a Ghost Hunting 101 class, and that is the first level of ghost hunting. That is the class that I use to teach my own investigators. And I go through and I teach them all about technique. I teach them all about protocols, what to do, what not to do during a ghost hunt, how to set up your ghost hunts, all that stuff. I teach all that stuff. I do it in 2 hours. It's pretty cool. I let you see some of my evidence too while I'm at it. But there's certain protocols to take. Even if you're what I call the recreational ghost hunter, when you go to the haunted hotels or restaurants with your family and say you want to spend the night in some hotel somewhere, and while everybody's sleeping, you want to sneak out and do some EVP work and stuff. I teach you how to actually set all that up to where you're going to get good quality EVPs when you do get them. Okay, because there's certain ways you can do it, and there's certain ways you can listen to the stuff and know exactly what you're listening to. So if you're interested in that, California Haunts Meetup, come on down, sign up, because they're going to start filling up. Okay? If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We are equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. And if you're watching from YouTube, please subscribe. There's a little ghost down there with a magnifying glass and a Sherlock Holmes hat. And click on that and you can subscribe, and you will see almost 260 videos over there. And they're varying topics, just like this week so far. We've had Jesse Fink has been on. Yesterday we talked about, what did we talk about yesterday? I'm tired. It's been a lot. I took a 6-hour nap today. That's how tired I am. Anyway, get senile after a while. So we've had like 3 different topics so far this week that we talked about. Monday was air safety. Yesterday, now I remember. Yesterday was conditions in jails and mentoring gang members to try or kids so that they don't become gang members and things like that. And then today, of course, was Jesse Fink about ACDC. So so that's what I'm talking about. When you go over to the YouTube site, you will see all these different types of videos, because I like to cover all these different types of topics. All right. You can also access those from CaliforniaHauntsRadio.com. And in fact, usually like tonight when you go in there, and give me about 15 minutes, this video will be posted on there, so you can see that if you miss some of it or whatever and you want to hear it. We also have a download site, as it will become a podcast in about 20 minutes, and you can find us on Apple and all the major podcast systems. All right. Tomorrow we're shifting gears now. We're going back to the paranormal. Lily Nova is going to be with us. Lily Nova is a photographer who lives in Missouri. And during COVID, she got to where she was out taking astral photography, which is something I want to get into. And so I'm excited to talk to her about it. And while she was out taking photos, she noticed that there were certain lights moving in the sky. And so this was happening every time she went out. And eventually, she made contact with the ETs. But the cool part of it is she documented it. She's got stuff on video. She's got photographs. And so she's going to be on tomorrow at 6:30 p.m., our usual time, to talk about that. And I'm hoping, I emailed her last night, I'm hoping to get some of her footage so I can show it during the program so you guys can see it. But she's going to be on with us tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. So I hope you come in and check that out. Anyway, I want to thank you all for coming. And I think I covered, I know, that PBS moment, always the PBS moment. California Haunts operates as a nonprofit, and we're not a nonprofit. On paperwork, we're not a nonprofit, but we operate as a nonprofit. And it's because we don't take any money to ghost hunt. We don't take any money for the radio show. We don't do any of that. But the thing is, I still have bills to pay. I'm retired, right? So anything you can donate would help to keep us going, to help pay the bills. Right now I've got 4 more bills to go, and we're trying to put all that together. That would be a PayPal.me at California Haunts, or Venmo. If you have a Venmo, just go into Venmo, type in California Haunts. You can do it that way. But I would really appreciate it. Appreciate the help. I love doing this show. I love bringing this information to you guys. And hopefully you can help me stay on the air and keep getting cool guests. All right. Anyway, with that being said, I'm going to show you Jesse's contact information and his books. And here we go. His website is jessefinkbooks.com. JESSEFINKBOOKS.com. Bond, The Last Highway, is the book we were talking about tonight, and that is for pre-order. And the other book is Jesse Fink, The Youngs. And his most recent book is Pure Narco, about the cartels, the drug cartels. And that can all be found at Amazon, of course, and on Jesse's site as well. Okay, guys, I will see you tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a nice evening.